Thanks everyone for coming to what is the last CHEP seminar of the spring semester. So the new university policies are such that public events are not to be scheduled anymore. So I hate dwelling on sort of the negative about cancellations and who's not coming, and that's why we were well on our way to putting together the fall 2020 a lineup for speakers, but we finalized the slots and put together the flyer, and I think we have a fabulous lineup that's coming in the fall for those of you that will be around. And we are ending our spring semester with a fantastic speaker. We have Marcus Dillender visiting us today from the University of Illinois, Chicago. He's a health and labor economist who's done a lot of research in the area of health insurance. He's published widely in top journals in the field, including the Journal of Public Economics, the Journal of Human Resources, the Journal of Health Economics, and so on. And today he's going to talk to us about workers' compensation programs. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a very good day. Very strange day, but it's been good. So thanks for having me. So this paper is joint with Marie Cooper. We're examining income benefit levels in workers' compensation insurance, estimating the impact of them on various aspects of the claims, and then using our estimates to think about what optimal benefit levels should be. So the basic rationale for workers' compensation insurance is the same as the basic rationale for other social insurance programs and for insurance more broadly. So adverse events, whether they be a job loss or a health shock, can have very detrimental effects on individuals' well-being. And since people are risk averse, social insurance can increase welfare by reducing risk exposure and making the bad state of the world less bad by having people give up a little bit of the good state of the world. But then issues can arise if the benefits themselves can alter people's behaviors, and the welfare losses from this moral hazard can offset some of the gains from risk reduction. So optimal benefit design has to balance the welfare gains from the risk reduction with the welfare costs for moral hazard, which means it's important to understand the behavioral responses to the generosity of insurance, which is what we're looking at in workers' compensation insurance. For people not familiar with workers' comp insurance, it's state-regulated insurance against workplace injuries and illnesses. Since it's regulated at the state level, all of the programs are a little bit different, but they have the same basic structure. Employers purchase these policies from private insurers or state funds, and then if their employees are injured at work, the workers' comp policy will pay for all of the workers' medical care associated with the injury, so no copays or deductibles or co-insurance. And if the person has to miss work because of the injury, workers' comp will pay benefits. So there are different names for the benefits, but states have two main types of benefits. The first is temporary income replacement for missed work arising from the injury or illness. So for each week that a person misses work and has to recover, workers' comp is going to pay them a function of their wage. Usually it's 2/3 or 70% of their wage up to a maximum. And then if people are still injured after they're done with their temporary income benefits, then they can also get unconditional cash benefits. So permanent impairment benefits, death benefits, some kind of unconditional cash transfer usually. So we're focused on this temporary income replacement for missed work. That's where our variation is going to be coming from. So, we're focused on this benefit for a few reasons. So one is it's the most common cash benefit. There's also a lot of debate over what these benefits should be. So a lot of states have changed their maximum benefits recently. There's wide variation, so I think I don't have the variation on this slide, but I think it goes from 400 to 15. I think Iowa you can get 1,500 if you miss work. So there's a lot of variation. States are continually trying to tweak these amounts. And there's also the chance that income replacement rates could lead to behavioral responses because they're tied directly to people's behavior. So there are a few different dimensions or margins that these benefit levels can affect claims. So one is at the extensive margin, so just whether or not people claim whenever higher benefits make claiming more lucrative. It could also affect the duration of claims or medical spending. I'll talk more about both of those margins later. So something you'll hear me say threw out a few times is that we're one of the first to look at the impact of these benefits on medical spending and the medical care that people receive. And this graph shows part of why we think that it's important to think about medical care right now. So this graph has the amount of benefits that are paid out in cash benefits, and then the amount that are paid out through medical care from 1980 to 2016. So in 1980, less than 30% of all benefits for workers' comp were paid out through medical care. But by the late 2000s or mid 2000s, really, it was roughly half and half. So this is just reflecting the fact that medical costs have risen dramatically throughout this time period, and workers' comp is no exception. So here are our main 3 questions of interest. So first, how does the generosity of income replacement benefits impact income benefit duration? So the length of time that people are away from work while they're recovering. We're also asking the same question for medical care and spending and the kinds of care that people receive. And then we're taking these behavioral responses and thinking about the welfare implications. So what are the welfare implications of increasing the benefit levels? So our approach to do this...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are there many differences sort of across states in sort of the investigatory procedures that sort of go on about, well, first, the likelihood that the particular injury sort of occurred during, official job duties, and obviously documenting that the injury is real?
There are differences across states. So we're going to be focusing on Texas here. There are differences across state in like anti-fraud measures, or in terms of the documentation that's required for people to be able to get workers' comp.
What does it look like in Texas?
So Texas doesn't have, so there are several different dimensions that might be relevant. So I think kind of what people seem to think might be most relevant, or something that is important in workers' comp systems, is physician choice. So in a lot of states, the employer gets to choose the physician that workers see. So I think the thinking is that in those states, that it's going to be harder for the employee has to clear a different threshold. Like the injury has to be more clearly and egregiously work-related. Whereas in a state like Texas, which is actually most states, the worker gets to choose the doctor. So the thinking goes that it's probably just easier to find a doctor of your own that's willing to sign off on some of these marginal injuries. Yes?
So, given that you're kind of ultimately interested in the welfare effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine that making these benefits more generous can induce, I think, what Joe's alluding at, to maybe people who are trying to report things that aren't really qualified as workers' comp or workers' comp. But you could also imagine that there are people who are legitimately hurt on the job who then want to, who then decide to use this advantage, or who are able to take advantage of this. And you could imagine, you could tell stories, the same thing about extended durations.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be able to tease out, or how do we think about? I guess I'm just saying, observe changes on these dimensions. Do we know kind of which direction they should go for the welfare effects? Presumably, it's good if more people are actually injured and they come out and report. Presumably, it's bad if more people are reporting things that weren't really injuries. Or something like that.
Yeah. So I'll start by showing just how maybe I should explain the variation, but I'll start by showing that. Let me explain the variation and then return to this, or let's explain this slide and then I'll return to this, because I think I can answer better once I've described just the basic empirical strategy. So our basic approach is we're going to leverage a sharp differential increase in these temporary benefit amounts. That's induced by Texas House Bill 7. So what Texas House Bill 7 did is change the maximum amount that people can receive whenever they have to miss work, which essentially increased benefits for people making above a certain threshold, but not for people in nearby parts of the income distribution. So what we do is use administrative data from Texas Workers' Comp to implement a difference in differences design that identifies the impact of the benefit generosity as how outcomes change for these high earners relative to low earners after the reform. So we don't find any change in the number of claims. So that's kind of the, I can show you how we do it. We're just going to look at trends between the high earners and the low earners and show that they track each other pretty well in terms of the number of claims. So we don't, and there are definitely stories for how the number of claims could change. We just don't see any evidence of it. So I think maybe that's to your question. We'll also look at different samples. So we'll look at emergency room claims under the assumption that they maybe have less discretion. So those are the main strategies. I think also, I'm trying to decide how much I want to get into your question, because I know that there's
everything to later on if you'd like.
It's definitely valid, and I think I expect that to come up a lot. So there's, and maybe there's, so there are. So I'll summarize the findings and then try to return to it again. So we don't find any evidence on the number of claims. So we do find these large increases in income benefit duration and then in medical spending on claims. And then we're going to use these estimates, and then we outline a model of the worker's decision to return to work. From this model, we come up with this formula that describes how welfare changes as the benefit changes. And then we calibrate this model using our estimated elasticities and then an estimate of the drop in consumption from previous literature to assess the marginal welfare impact of it, increasing the generosity of benefits. And we find that increasing the generosity of benefits actually lowered overall welfare. So I think, with all that said, I think a question that I think is, I think you might, another way of saying it might be that there are price effects here of like the benefit of staying out of work longer has changed relative to going back to work, but there's also like this income effect. So if you get more income, maybe you're able to stay out of work longer. And those would be different welfare implications. For people who've done a lot of theory, like these are kind of like classic price versus income effects. So we don't, our best way of handling this is that there is a change in another part of the income distribution to these permanent impairment benefits. So people do get like different lump sum cash amounts. So it's not actually changing the return to being out of work, but it's just a cash infusion, a cash drop to people. And we don't see that there's any change on either the claims duration margin or the medical spending margin there. So that's kind of the best that we're able to do there. I don't know if that really answered your question, but I might have answered around your question.
Yeah, well, and given that you have a model that's going to lay out exactly how you're thinking about this, then I think that's...
Okay.
We can return to that at that point in the talk if need be.
Feel free to ask. I don't anticipate on having a lot of time to get into the nitty-gritty of the model. So I don't think anybody wants me to get into the nitty-gritty of the model, but so feel free to ask questions that are related to welfare throughout. Because, we're having to make some assumptions to get to the welfare implications for sure that are relevant and we can discuss. But so we view this paper as contributing to two different literatures. So one is the literature that studies the impact of income benefit generosity in workers' compensation insurance. So people don't really find any evidence that income benefits affect claim incidence, but they do find that they affect claim duration, which is similar to what we're finding as well. So we make a few contributions to this research. So one is these papers all use data from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So a lot's changed in terms of workers' comp since then, and in terms of just how we do empirical research. So we're using more recent data. We're also the first to look at medical spending, which has potentially big implications for workers' comp. And we're thinking about the optimal benefits. So we're also contributing to the second literature on moral hazard insurance and optimal benefits. People have thought about this in other settings, but not in workers' comp. So here's the outline. Go over the background next. So here's how the claim process works in Texas. So again, most states are similar. Not all are exactly the same though. So a worker's injured at work, in all states, that worker can receive treatment that's paid for by workers' compensation insurance immediately and fully. So again, the person doesn't have to pay anything for any of this coverage. And the worker gets to choose the treating doctor in Texas. Again, that's not true of all states. The worker can start receiving these income replacement benefits, or TIBs, if I accidentally call them TIBs. I just mean the cash benefit for each week of work that they have to miss. So if they miss at least 7 days of work. This number varies across states from 3 to 7. And then these benefits are going to replace 70% of lost wages up to a weekly max at the time of injury. This at the time of injury part is going to be important for the empirical approach. And then the worker stops receiving these benefits at the earliest of these 3 possible things. So if the worker wants to return to work, they're able to. The treating doctor can say that the worker has reached maximum medical improvement, and then these income benefits, or there's a 2-year cap. So not all states have caps. Texas has a 2-year cap. If people are still injured after they're done receiving the income benefits, they can be assessed for permanent impairment benefits, and workers that are permanently impaired are going to receive a lump sum at the end of this. So in terms of how benefits can affect benefit duration, I think the argument is pretty straightforward. A higher benefit generosity makes receiving benefits and not returning to work more attractive relative to ending benefits and returning to work. So that would lead to an increase in benefit duration. The paths for medical spending are maybe less direct, but there are several possible ways that benefit generosity can affect medical spending. So one is if people stay out of work longer, for this first part up here, then their opportunity cost of time is going to be lowered, which will allow them to receive more medical care. In addition to facilitating more medical care, staying out of work longer can necessitate receiving more medical care. So to stay out of work longer, you're going to need more check-ins with the doctor about work capacity. You may just also appear sicker if you're saying you can't go to work, and then that could lead to more medical care. There could also be direct effects of staying out of work longer or receiving money that could either increase or decrease health, which would have their own impact on medical care. So we're not really going to be able to nail which of these mechanisms down well in the end, but we can show some. I can show some evidence, and it's supplemental if I have time, that it looks like people are staying out of work longer because people are receiving this additional medical care while they're out of work. So Texas House Bill 7 reformed the process for setting the max benefit. So prior to the reform, the max was set by state statute. So Texas is a state that the legislature just doesn't meet that often. So it required them to find the time to increase the max. They just didn't. They hadn't for many years. But in 2005, effective in 2006, they set the max equal to 88% of the state average weekly wage. It's calculated by the Texas Workforce Commission using the unemployment insurance wage data. So this induced a sharp increase in the max benefit for workers injured on or after October 1st, 2006. And again, benefit rates are based on the schedule, benefit schedule on the date of injury. So even for people who were injured in September of 2006, their benefit rates don't change whenever this new benefit schedule goes into effect.
Sorry, this is am I understanding this correctly? The 88% of the state average weekly wage. That's not proportional to your income.
Right. So it's proportional to you get
your income up until you hit the 88%.
2/3 of your income.
2/3 of your income
up until you get 88%.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully this will help.
Okay.
This shows the change in the benefit schedule. So the black line is the original benefit schedule. The dashed blue line is the new schedule. On the x-axis, pre-injury weekly average earnings, and then this is the potential weekly benefit. So before the reform, people earning $771 or above had a weekly max of $540. They wouldn't get any more. It didn't matter how much more you made over $771, you would get $540. After the increase, So everybody making 963 and above got a nearly 25% increase in their benefit. People making 771 in between got somewhere between a 0 and 25% increase in their benefits. This is a large increase. I should say there's also an increase to the minimum benefit. This is kind of small and weird, and there aren't a lot of people here, so we're going to focus on a sample. I think 540 and above is our sample that we're focusing on. And then this here we have just the fraction of claimants at each pre-injury average weekly earnings, just to show that we have plenty of people who are affected by this cutoff. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So we argue that Texas is a great setting to study this issue, which we're doing a study on it, so that's an argument we need to make, but I really do think that it's true. So one, Texas is a large state. Millions and millions of people are covered by the workers' comp. There's also great data available, or at least I think that it's great data. Hopefully you all will as well. Texas is one of those states that just doesn't trust the government, and so wants a lot of government transparency. So people are always surprised whenever I say, "Oh, we got this data from Texas." They're like, "Oh, they're pro-research." No, they're anti-government. They're anti-benefits. They just want to make sure that people aren't building the system, and they want everybody who does anything with the government to be absorbed. So we, these data come from a series of open records requests, and then they were denied, and then we appealed them, and then the Texas Attorney General always rolled with us for them to give us the data. And there's also just recent sharp variation. So a lot of times these benefits are indexed to inflation, so it's hard to study them just because they're trying to make it so that there aren't actually changes in the max benefit. So Texas workers' comp is similar to other states in most dimensions. So the one peculiar feature, if I presented this to workers' comp experts, I would have gotten this like the second I mentioned Texas, is that employer participation in workers' comp is voluntary in Texas, but nowhere else. It's mandated in all other states. Despite voluntary participation, participation is still high in Texas, so nearly 80% of workers are covered by workers' comp. We don't find any change, again, in the number of claims based on our variation. I wouldn't think this as a threat to internal validity, but you can think about external validity here. There's no evidence of selection in this market, but these 22% of workers tend to work at places that have lower injury rates. They're in industries that have lower injury rates on average.
So another question regarding kind of the external validity. What in terms of the design might be similar to other states, but are the benefit levels also similar?
There's a lot of variation. So there's that's a good question. I want to say that Texas is in the median, but I want to say that again just because it's convenient for me. I'm not sure if that's true. Texas isn't an outlier though.
Okay.
Yeah, Texas is an outlier is all I can say. Again, I think Iowa is the outlier, which is a weird state to be the outlier, but I think it's like the one that's like close to 2,000 now. Yeah. Yes.
So you don't see any participation change across the same period?
So like employer participation? Yeah. Let's see. So I can answer that question. I'm not sure I do. I think that there's actually a slight downward trend in participation.
So the number of claims might be like of a slightly smaller number of firms, right?
Like if smaller firms are dropping out? Or?
No, I was thinking like if you have a slightly smaller number of firms, but the claims are sort of stable, then it might be like kind of slightly more claims per firm.
So I don't actually know the employer, so I don't actually know if the claims per firm. So I don't see any change in the share of claims, which I can show you soon, but I might be... So I guess, so in terms of internal validity, it's kind of a stretch to think that firms are going to they're going to stop participating just because of this benefit increase. And there are ways, these firms are experience rated, so it's not totally impossible. It would have to be immediate, and it doesn't look like it is based on the event study graphs. And a lot of these policies aren't they have policy end dates that don't align with this policy perfectly. So we're not concerned about internal validity, but definitely happy to entertain any questions about it. So here's our data. So we're going to combine two different data sets. So the first is just all medical bills paid for by workers' compensation insurers in Texas from 2005 to 2017. These data have a lot of information about the medical treatment that people receive. So we know the type of health care, the amount the charge, the amount paid, the reason. We know the exact date that care was received. We know the zip code of the provider. We also know a lot about the claim and claimant. So we know birth year, month, zip code of their residence, the year, month of injury and illness, which is going to be important for understanding which scheme they should be on. So we know they're an encrypted claim identifier, which is also important. So this allows us to link all medical care back to the original injury. So we're going to be focusing on a claim level data set here. And to this data set, this claim level data set, we're going to merge in a claim level data set on cash benefits, which importantly also has this encrypted claim identifier. We'll know what benefits they receive, the pre-injury average weekly wage, which allows us to calculate what their benefit amount is, and then we know the dates that they receive these benefits. Those are the data. So it's not quite going to be a difference in differences design because we're going to be taking into account the fact that not everybody got the full increase, but I think it's easiest to think of it as a difference in differences design. So our baseline sample is going to be claimants receiving these income replacement benefits from January 2005 to September 2006. Again, the policy went into effect October 1st, 2006, or September 2007. Who have a prior average weekly wage of $540 to $4,000. This gives us roughly parity in the treatment and comparison group. So we have about 34,000 in the treatment and 30,000 in the comparison group. So the comparison group here is middle earners, and the treatment group is high earners. We're also going to, again, focus on a few different samples or show results for a few different samples. So one is 3 years after the reform. The problem is with this, or the concern is that these wages do change, or these maxes do change slightly every year because the law says that they're going to change every year at the same time, same month. And then we'll also focus on these like emergency claims. Again, the idea here is that if you're worried about people timing their injury or reporting, then I would think that there would be less of a concern here with these claims that start in the emergency room. So the empirical strategy will, again, investigate claims rates, show that there's no effect there. So then we're going to focus on claim outcomes, in particular income replacement benefit duration and then medical spending. So the exposure measure is going to be the implied change in the weekly benefit amount due to the reform. So it's your new benefit, or your benefit under the new schedule minus your benefit under the old schedule. So we're inflation adjusts all these benefits to the month before the schedule change. So these are slight adjustments, but technically right. And then report the overall effect of the schedule change on affected claimants by scaling the measure, the exposure measure, by the mean value of affected claimants. So this is going to give us the average effect of the reform. So this scaling is going to it's going to apply equally across all time frames. It's not a time dependent scaling. So this is you can interpret the effect of this reform as being the mean effect of the mean change in the weekly benefit rate among claimants exposed to the reform. So this is all our estimates are going to be like the effect of a $90 or 16% increase in benefits. So it'll be a typical difference in differences setup. We'll show estimates on this time flexible coefficient, so you can see how the treatment and control group change over time. We're going to do that in 3-month bins. We'll also control for injury month by county fixed effects, and then additional controls, age, gender, day of week of first treatment, and then ED start. We'll show specifications with fewer controls. Also include more controls. The results aren't very sensitive. So the identifying assumption here is that outcomes of interest would have evolved in parallel for claimants differentially exposed to the rate update in the absence of the reform, the typical difference in differences assumption. So we're going to assess this in three ways. So the first is, again, to illustrate there's no change in claim counts or in claim composition based on observables, right, that in a way that's related to the benefit change. Also plot the beta coefficients, this time the event study, which I always find reassuring, and it is reassuring here. And then again, we'll show the alternative specifications. We can show different sets of controls too. So here's our claim rates by month. So the way that to interpret this is separate series for high earners and low earners. So everything is indexed to September 2006. So actually to time -1, you can change that. So to just take the black line. So this is how the percent difference in claims in each year month relative to what they were in period -1. And then the dashed line is the same thing for the middle earners. So these track each other pretty well, so it doesn't look like there was a sudden switch in there being more high earner claims right when the policy was passed. Again, or say time 0 is when the policy was passed. Or I guess time 1 is when the policy was passed. And this table shows balance. So here we're just taking our empirical strategy. We're not including any controls, and we're just estimating these are the baseline coefficient. So this is the average measure, the coefficient on the average measure. And if you look at the p-values, there don't seem to be any change in these observables related to the policy or the benefit increase. Okay. Now, in results. So this graph is the effect on log of income benefit duration. So the dependent variable is log of weeks out of work. This everything can be interpreted as how the outcome changes for high earners relative to low earners, relative to what the difference was in 1 to 3 months before the reform. Again, this is about a 16% increase or $90 increase in the benefit rate. So prior to the reform being implemented, they tracked each other pretty well relative to 1 to 3 months before, but then in the year after, people injured tended to be out of work longer. So again, this is based on injury days. So these people were injured 9 to 11 months after, but we're tracking them for several years after their injury. And in this table, we have just the average effects. So just averaging all of these coefficients relative to these coefficients, essentially. So we find that this 16% increase in benefits led to about an 11% increase in time out of work. The second column, we have removed some controls. So the control for the claim originating in the emergency department or the day of week. So all controls related to the injury, we find a similar coefficient. In this third column, our dependent variable is just in levels on logs. Again, this is about a two-week effect. In this fourth column, we're focusing on the emergency department claims, finding similar results, and then again, the estimates aren't dramatically different when we expand the sample and use a longer post period. So the implied benefit duration elasticity is about 0.69. So we can do the same thing with medical spending. So we're focusing on 5-year medical spending. Again, not a lot going on in the pre-period. They're tracking each other well. In the post-period, the high earners have more medical spending in the first 5 years after an injury. This table shows the average effects as well. So it's about a 10% increase in medical spending. In levels, this is about a $1,200 increase in medical spending associated with this 16% increase in benefit levels. So the implied medical spending elasticity is 0.62. So one thing to notice is that this is a smaller elasticity, but it's actually bigger. There's going to be a bigger effect in cash relative to here if you were to calculate these out, just because there's a lower, or there's the base, the pre-mean dependent variable is higher for the medical benefits.
So I've got two questions. One, I guess I'm just realizing now, I'm not sure why we should expect to see a change in the medical spending if the benefit was about, covering your wages lost from work.
Yeah.
Is it just that you're seeking, for the same injury, you're seeking more medical attention? You're doing more tests and more, I will meet with that specialist or what have you?
So there are a few reasons. Do you want to ask your second? Let me answer and then you can get your second one. So there are a few reasons. So one is just like you have more time. I think that's kind of what we have in mind is like you just have more time to get more care. Like there's big opportunity cost. Like these people don't have any out-of-pocket cost for receiving care. The only out-of-pocket cost is their time.
Sure.
So whenever they're not going to work, it's cheaper for them to be receiving this care. But it could be that they do have to get more. To get more case management services just to the doctor has to fill out this paperwork saying you're still injured. So there are other reasons too. Those are kind of what we have in mind.
My other question is in the interpretation, we're thinking about this. So the range of incomes you have included here is quite large, right? The people that are kind of the untreated is relatively narrow, and then because you have drawn your kind of the rightmost cutoff, it seems like to kind of match the number of observations, you end up, including a bunch of people who are making, 4 times the amount of income as the people there. Have you run this by income bins? Because you could imagine that the people who should be most effective are the ones that are kind of just on the right side, of that cutoff, and that once you get to the $4,000 per week, sure, you might have seen a small increase in how much you were getting paid, but relative to maybe the monthly expenses you have or what have you, you can imagine that there'd be a diminished effect for those in the high tail relative to those that are kind of right in there. A simple thing would just be putting treated bins by income. I don't know if you've looked at that at all.
Yeah, so we've thought about that, and we could. So I've made sure that the results are, if we just like drop a lot of these really high earners, then the results are similar. But I know your point is valid and different. That there could just be differential effects. I should push on that more. I don't know if we have enough variation or enough. We could try pushing on more and just seeing if there are people in that higher part of the income distribution have differential effects. And I think it's really not completely clear how to think about this because so we're kind of thinking about this as like a change to the level of the benefit they could get. But I think your point is like, well, if you think about it as a change to their replacement rate, which
think about the change of the opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
Relative, So
it's just like
it's like
in
logs, not in levels. So then it's a much smaller change for the person who's making $4,000 a week versus those who are who are kind of just within that 500 to 800 range.
Yeah. We can push on more and should. Yeah. Is there a Brandon, did you have a question too?
Is there any chance that these actually are worse injuries? I don't know if you can somehow sort of decompose the medical spending to see what categories it's in. Maybe these kind of higher earning people are actually moving to different firms that are riskier after the change, or they're kind of not as worried about having to be out of work longer, so they're kind of taking more risks. Maybe that could explain medical spending?
Yeah, so we did a few things to argue, I should say, that that's not the case, and I think in the end it's, trying to prove this null result is maybe a challenge, and one thing that, I won't go back to the balance table, but one thing we've done that's not here is to show, to try to predict what people's medical spending will be based on their observables, including their industry, just whatever information we have, we just throw in there and try to predict what their medical spending should be. And we don't find any change in predicted medical spending based on observables, but again, we can only do this on observables, of course. So yeah, that's, we can't, we tried our best to rule that out, I think, is what I can say there. I also looked at the effect on if the type of injury changes, and there's nothing, we just don't see any evidence there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any sense that doctors know this, so that they're just ordering more tests and increase? Right. So if someone comes in and you know it's like a workers' comp, and you know the kind of job they have is probably, I suspect that that's maybe not happening, but do we have any sense that?
No, I think that could happen. I mean, I think this. I don't. I think we're thinking about this as being like worker motivated driven, but I don't think it has to be. I think it could. Doctors could be facilitating this. So, I mean, I don't think that. I certainly don't want to argue that that's not possible. Yeah. And I don't. I mean, maybe it might change the way you. For the welfare analysis, it's not going to matter, but
But I mean, it might, right? So if it's the doctors doing it and not the patients doing it, then if you could like control that piece, then the implications are a little bit different.
So I got to.
Yeah, please keep going.
What time do I go? No, I just have half an hour. Okay. Okay. So the welfare, the assumption we're doing like a Raj Chetty framework for economists who have studied public, and so kind of the assumption is that this something that I expect to get and I haven't gotten, but maybe y'all are thinking, or maybe I kind of already got it and didn't realize it. Is that maybe this medical care is good, right? Maybe don't we want, a lot of times we say we want people to get medical care, and this is kind of like what we're worried about. And Audrey's point, maybe like if a doctor's saying you need this medical care, maybe that's good. Maybe that's different than a worker just saying I don't want to be at work longer. So we have a few ways of thinking about the productivity of this medical care empirically. So one is we are going to have like a permanent impairment rating at the end, which is kind of ideal, which is nice, right? To be able to like say, well, are these people less impaired because of this? And we don't find any evidence of that. We can also look at medical spending, so these benefits end within 2 years. We can look at medical spending after those 2 years, so in years 3 through 5. And we don't find that there's like a decrease in spending there. So these don't suggest that this medical spending is super productive. So in the welfare framework, workers are going to be able to value medical care. We're not modeling leisure, but they can also value leisure. But the idea is that these aren't first order effects. So the reason that it's going to that these welfare effects or the medical spending isn't going to increase welfare in our model is because of the envelope theorem. So it's the idea that these people could have always gotten this medical care. So if there are really these just huge gains for doctors to say, actually, why don't you get more medical care? If there were really these like first order effects, they would have already done it. So that's, I mean, you can agree or disagree with that. That's kind of like an important assumption. How we're able to come up with this formula. And same with leisure. So we don't model leisure, but people value leisure. That's fine. That's not. We're not saying that they don't, and our model doesn't say that they don't. But we're just saying that these aren't. They could have always taken this extra time.
So is your model going to say that because they didn't before that they're not productive, or is your model going to say that the marginal return to the individual is going to be bounded by the change in the opportunity cost of it?
So I'm not quite sure. It might be the same thing as the second part you said, but I'm not quite sure. And we're not saying that it's not productive. We're not saying that this medical care isn't productive.
So you're saying it's not valued?
we're not saying it's not valued. We're saying that this change in benefit isn't changing the. So it's saying we were already at an optimum for medical spending. They were already at an optimal for medical spending. So if you change some variable that influences medical spending, the change is not gonna. We're already at that optimum. So the change to benefits or the change to the overall utility from making that change isn't going to be massive.
Okay.
It's the envelope theorem. Which
Sure, but it's
I had to remind myself of this way back when, but yeah.
But it's bound, so that initial optimum is based on a particular opportunity cost, and that, you know,
A particular opportunity cost of their time.
Okay, or what have you, right? And so if the idea is that you have a policy here where you're relaxing that opportunity cost, you know, on the margin a little bit, right? And that they're going to adjust in such a way that with that new lower opportunity cost, we're going to seek a little bit more care.
Right.
Right.
Okay. I think that's yes. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we've looked at medical spending. Medical spending is a skewed measure. We can also just look at medical bills, trying to get some measure of just Q and not Q times P. Even though, again, I should say, hopefully it's clear whenever I say medical spending, like workers aren't spending anything. I hope I made that clear. This is all from the insurer. So this is just the number of bills. Similar pattern. Yeah, so it's the 16% increase in benefits increases bills by about 8%. So we've looked at different measures of healthcare. We don't have a lot of power to distinguish amongst these. So we don't notice major changes in emergency visits or surgeries. So I always feel like this is kind of unfair to show because emergency visits don't typically happen after the first day anyway, but you wouldn't expect to find effects there, and we don't. Something like physical therapy, we do see larger effects, just where you would expect a lot of discretion. We can also do this heterogeneity based on claimant observables. Again, here we really don't have power, but generally the effect on benefit duration and medical spending move in the same direction. I pointed to the one exception, which is male-female, but generally less dangerous, slightly higher than more dangerous. But again, we don't have a lot of power here to say much about heterogeneity. So we don't find any evidence that benefit rates affect claim rates. Our implied benefit duration elasticity is 0.69. So prior estimates using data from a long time ago are 0.3 to 0.4, so we're finding a slightly higher, a significantly higher estimate. So one thing, we don't make a big deal about this in the paper, but if they control for medical spending in their paper, which we're showing is a wrong thing to do, and if we actually do control for medical spending like they do, we get very similar estimates as they do. And our implied elasticity of medical spending with respect to benefits is meaningful, 0.62. It's helpful to think about what these elasticities mean for insurer cost. So to do this, consider this equation where cost is going to be the benefit duration times the benefit plus medical spending. So the little b is the benefit rate. So if we just derive the cost with respect to the benefit, which is what this policy is doing, is we're trying to figure out how cost changes as the benefit changes. So we get that the cost is going to be so if you wanted to increase benefits by $1, you would need to give everybody who's had a week of benefits already an extra $1. And then this term is going to be the people that are induced, the extra benefits that are induced because of this benefit change, and you're going to have to pay them the full benefit right here. And then this third term is the effect on medical spending. And we can rewrite this, pull out the dB, and then this is like the effect of a dollar increase right here. And we have these terms. So this term right here is the elasticity with respect to of duration with respect to benefits. This is a semi-elasticity. So we have both of these. So the key takeaway is the behavioral responses due to medical spending and benefit durations are equally important. So again, this number is actually slightly higher than, because we're comparing it to the benefit duration here, whereas whenever I'm talking about just the elasticity, I'm comparing it to the medical spending pre-levels. So collectively, these behavioral responses are 1.43 times the size of this direct mechanical change. So this is the direct mechanical change. Dollar increase, everyone who's getting the benefit needs a dollar more for each week. And the impact of the behavioral responses on costs are roughly 4 times larger than what prior estimates would suggest. If you don't look at medical spending or worse control for medical spending. So this is the impact on employer or on insurer costs. So we do a few other take a few other approaches to look at to try to understand this relationship between receiving income benefits and medical spending better. So one thing we want to do is just look at the timing of receiving these extra income benefits and receiving medical care. So we don't have the injury date, we just have the injury year month. But we do have the date of first treatment, which we're going to use as an approximate injury date. And then so do separate regressions for every 2-week bin. So essentially just redo the analysis, but take weeks 1 to 2 after an injury, or I should say 0 to 1 after an injury, and see how the likelihood of receiving income benefits during that week changes. And then do it for weeks 2 through 3, and then weeks 4 through 5. So just do several different regressions, and then do the same for medical spending. Yes?
So I'm just thinking about my recent injury, and then it took like 2 weeks to even get a first appointment, and then a month and a half to get a PT appointment. So like, what's the average sort of wait time for physicians, like within, I'm wondering if like, that you could improve this by like kind of modeling what the average time to like appointment would be. Because if it's not immediate, and if it's like a week lag or 2 weeks lag, maybe that would be a little bit better.
Yeah. I don't know if we have great numbers on that. I think looking
like or just in Texas in general, or within certain like insurers within Texas.
We can look at. Yeah, and so I mean, for what I'm talking about here, I think what you're saying is helpful for improving the precision and helpful for interpreting this. Since I've done one paper before where I needed the exact injury date, and it was very important. And I kind of had to punt on that one where it was like where I would really love to be able to do what you're talking about. So I just don't know. I don't know, and I think it's relevant. And I've like tried finding these numbers, but I could maybe we could look at different cities or that have more. We could look at like medical resources maybe to go with that. And I mean I think that's Again, here this is like supplemental evidence. I've wanted to think about this in other settings. It's like the exact injury date. So these are. There are a lot of different coefficients plotted here. So this right here is the effect on being out of work in the first within the first 2 weeks of treatment. So there's nothing really going on here, but then I think it's like right after 6 weeks of being out that we see or 6 weeks since injury that you're much more likely to be out of work or to receive these benefits. And then it goes down over time. but again, these are if we evaluated these to their levels, it probably wouldn't go down as much. But this is like the percentage point change in the likelihood of receiving income benefits for each 2-week bin. So this line here is when benefits ended. If everybody started receiving benefits on the date of their injury, nobody would receive benefits after this, but not everybody starts receiving benefits after their injury. But it looks like most people have exhausted their benefits. And then, so here's the similar graph for having a positive medical bill at all. Again, there's nothing really going on at first, but this seems to follow for when people were out of work. Do these graphs make sense to people? I was worried that somebody told me once they didn't make sense, and it haunts me every time I present it now. It's just because it is different. Like these are structured differently than the graphs that we've been looking at.
As soon as you pointed to the line and explained what that was, that was the week cutoff.
Okay.
It made perfect sense.
Okay. I hope that's true. But if you don't have a question, or if you have a question, I know I'm like drastically changing the way I'm structuring the results and the underlying regression here. And then this is the inverse hyperbolic sine of medical costs, doing the same thing. This is what I'm rushing through to try to get to this. I'm a fast talker overall. I always want people to be a fast talker whenever they present. So it's like, just hurry up. But then I know some people probably don't like that. So here's the main idea is they track each other pretty well. People are receiving this care whenever they're out of work. They're out of work for longer, or whenever they're out of work, they're receiving the additional care. Again, if we thought that being out of work longer saved workers' comp money in the long run, if these people were receiving less care in the end, we would see this be negative. These like dashed and dotted lines be negative. But we don't see that. They're statistically indistinguishable from zero, which you show in the paper. But if anything, they're positive. This isn't. We'll give people more care in the first few months after an injury, and then save some money in the long term. So again, we think this is suggestive that part of the effect on income benefits on medical spending just comes through the effect of income benefits on benefit duration and being out of work longer. Just to summarize some additional analysis. So again, we can look at impairment rating. So at the end of whenever you're done receiving these benefits, the doctor says you're 7% impaired or you're 1% impaired, and then gives you cash benefits. So in some ways, this is like a really great measure of health. This is an independent measure of health that we want. We don't find any evidence that these ratings change. So we also have a third bullet point. There's a lump sum cash payment that people can receive. So these permanent impairment benefits. That's the reason that you get this permanent impairment rating, is to determine what your benefits will be. So this is kind of just a cash drop for these people. So in this Raj Chetty framework, he has co-authors, and sorry to leave them off, but this, for me to call this moral hazard, I kind of need to rule out this like cash drop effect. And this is a different part of the income distribution, which is why we're not really focusing on it as much here, but we don't find any evidence that this like cash drop changes people's behavior. So something that we're also concerned about and have gotten questions about is there's some evidence and some concern that there's cost shifting in workers' comp. So if you're, so workers' comp is supposed to pay for all of this medical care. If it's illegal might be too strong a word, but health insurance is not supposed to pay for this care, or that these aren't supposed to be out-of-pocket costs that the worker has to bear. So maybe we're missing some of. You could be concerned that we're missing some of that, and that a lot of this increase in medical spending is just actually whenever people are out of work. It's harder for workers' comp insurers to deny them claims, but we actually have. Bills rejected. We have we can look at the share of bills rejected by workers' comp insurers and show that it doesn't seem to change in important ways that are correlated with the policy. I'm just going to show you this first bullet point. Maybe I I won't. I'll just maybe finish a few months early, or a few minutes early. We can also just look at the relationship between medical spending and when your benefits end. Just look, so this descriptive analysis, but show that. Actually, it's just easier. I'm gonna go to it. It won't take long. So this is just create a data set with claimants' medical spending for each week relative to when benefits end, for up to 6 weeks before benefits end, and then 26 weeks after. So here are those graphs. So medical spending, this is all relative to time 0, so which is when the last full week of TIPS. So there's more medical spending right before these benefits end, and then right whenever the benefits end, people just stop receiving care. So again, this is more evidence consistent with the reason that people are receiving additional care is that they're out of work longer. That's the mechanism. But again, can't really get that, nail that down. Yes?
So in the impairment ratings, how kind of gross are they? Are there guidelines for these, or is it your 10 to 15% if you have some mobility things, or 20? I'm just sort of curious, is there a possibility that even within some range, people are still slightly more productive if they had extra care? Or is it pretty fine grained?
Both, I would say. I mean, I think your point's taken that this measure might not be perfect. So it's for another study or another project that we're working on, we're actually devoting a lot of attention to trying to understand these impairment ratings, and doctors don't have a lot of flexibility. So it's if your leg is injured, what's the angle of your leg when they push it back, or what can you lift? The ratings are very specific, the rating guidelines. But I think I don't want to say for 100% sure that this is the perfect measure, and since we don't see any movement there, then there's not some measure of health that this isn't picking up, or I can't.
Well, I'm just kind of curious about the types of jobs that are at the upper end too, right? Whether all these impairments would necessarily even impact, or maybe impact them more, right? So, I mean, I'm just wondering what kind of jobs are up at that upper tail.
At the upper tail of the income distribution?
That are getting these benefits more. Are they the kinds of jobs that would require more, say, arm movement or leg movement, or are they ones that require less, or more lifting, or less lifting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's see. We have an industry better than occupation. We don't have we don't actually know what the workers are doing. We know their industries, and even that's pretty broad. Yeah, I can't speak to what they are, but I can look at them. I can look at their broad industry more. So are they in construction? Are they in health care management? We don't actually know what they're doing, which is unfortunate, and I wish that we did. And, yeah. Yes, Brady?
Is the impairment rating only given once?
It is only given once, yeah. So it's given, there's some nuance there. It's given more if they can be appealed. But it's really only given once for most people. And the reason for giving the impairment rating is to give this permanent cash benefits, just to determine how that's given.
So is it actually aligned with the benefit period, the impairment rating? Is it given toward the end of the...
So that's another reason. Well, I don't know if this is your exact point, and if it's not, clarify me. So in terms of another reason we're not making a big super huge deal about the lump sum cash benefit is it's given after these benefits end. So it's once your temporary income benefits end, it's given then. It's not a lump sum cash benefit that's given at the time of injury. It's at the time of maximum medical improvement, which is another way of saying your temporary income benefits end. So for us to say that this is a perfect test of this income drop thing, we're having to assume that people are have perfect foresight and know what their benefits are going to be, and yeah.
So is it possible you wouldn't even have an impairment rating?
It is.
Okay.
A lot of people haven't. Well, I'm getting my projects confused, but Impairment ratings are common. Like I want to say like around 50% have them, permanent impairment, but they're typically really small. They're typically like, 1%. You're 1% impaired, so that's like you get 3 weeks of impairment benefits. Yes.
Are there any? Is the distribution of injuries consistent throughout the income distribution? So there's like different types of injuries on the high end versus low end.
I don't know about throughout the income distribution. I guess I haven't. I've looked at if there's a different for all of these things. I've thought really hard about is there a differential change related to the policy? So is there a differential change in the high income distribution at the time of the policy? But I think I'm not saying that it's not important to think about. Like this is I don't know the answer to that question. I think my guess is that the lower paying jobs are kind of what you would expect. Like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, that's not true. I don't know the answer to that question. But I can see how it would be helpful for interpretation. Do you have a thought in mind? Or?
No, I think I was just kind of knowing what you were doing. If you're comparing the low end to the high end versus just the high end before and after. Yeah.
We're never doing that, just
Yeah.
the low and the high end. But you could, a lot of times when people do different studies, they're like, here's the one difference, here's the second difference, here's the differences of this, and we're not doing it that way, but we could. So the model's messy, and I just think nobody likes to see it, but if you do and I didn't leave enough time, I'm sorry, we can talk afterwards. So the welfare framework is, we're gonna have a worker who lives for T periods, they become injured at time 0, they're going to have different consumptions if they're not working or working, and then the worker chooses whether or not to go back to work. So an agent's going to choose assets in the next period, as well as effort to recover, and then their medical spending. So here's, again, sorry, here's the agent's problem. So a worker who, so there's a value function for a worker who has returned to work, and then who hasn't returned to work. So here's how medical spending falls out here. So just to highlight, we're not saying workers don't value medical spending, but what we're saying is whether or not they're at work, or whether, I'll get this right. So workers can value medical spending, but it doesn't matter if they're, like the amount of time that they're out of work doesn't factor into how much they value the medical spending. If that were to happen, then medical spending wouldn't fall out of the welfare calculation. So then we can write this. So this is what the worker's solving. They're maximizing their effort to return to work. Or maximizing over their effort to return to work. And then the social planner's problem is to maximize the worker's expected utility at time 0, subject to agent optimization and then a balanced budget constraint. So this balanced budget constraint is why there's a trade-off to higher benefits, right? So the idea is that workers have to pay this through lower wages or through some sort of tax. What we're modeling is tax, but it doesn't have to be through a tax. Otherwise, if it was just you get more benefits, like the worker would always just be better off to have more benefits. So it gets messy. We have most of these things. This is the benefit. Whenever we derive this function, this is the benefit to staying out of work longer. It's the consumption smoothing, and then this is the cost. We do a Taylor series approximation. That was like Raj Chetty's big thing. So this thing that we don't have and can't estimate falls out. And then we have all of the costs. So we take a paper from Erin Todd Ronchetti that estimates this consumption drop. Plug in her estimates, and here's this table summarizes the marginal welfare impact of the increase in benefits. So if we take the coefficient relative risk aversion 2, so if we just use the previous estimates, we find that increasing these benefits increases welfare if we use our baseline duration elasticity, so 0.69, but don't take into account medical spending, we find that it falls, so increasing these benefits lowered welfare, and then if you take into account medical spending, we really find this a negative effect on welfare. It's helpful to interpret these relative to the cost of, or the increase in benefits. So the baseline elasticity estimates suggest a net welfare loss equal to roughly 40% of the cost of the increase in benefits. So overall, again, we find increasing these benefits lowered welfare for the workers overall. So just to very quickly summarize, so analyze the effect of this large differential increase in Texas using their workers' comp administrative data. And again, we find that there are behavioral dimensions in terms of time out of work and medical spending. And then if we calibrate this model of the decision to return to work, we find that there was a decrease in welfare from increasing these benefits. So thank you for your time. Thanks for braving the coronavirus.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Hope to be here for a few minutes if you have sort of final questions. Thank you all for coming and supporting the seminar series this year. Sorry it cut a little short, but we will be back, God willing, in the fall to begin this series again. So thanks again, Marcus. I
Thank you.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for